Okay, guys, first classical game in a long time, and of course, I had to use our King's Indian defense. And thanks to it, when I got home and reviewed the game with the engine, I had a 97% accuracy. Now, before I keep bragging about this, before I keep bragging about this game, you should know it's the first round. I'm playing a lower rated opponent, and this accuracy was actually by accident. So you'll see what I mean. Now, my opponent, guys, is a 1798, almost 1800 player. And of course, I have to be careful, but you're going to see that he made a simple strategic mistake that costed him the game. Now, I'm going to show you the entire game, but before we get to it, let me ask you, what variation of the King's Indian defense is this one? Well, if you have already gone over all of our lessons, you should be more than familiar with it, but still, guys, it is a tricky one. You're going to see that this game started, of course, with d4. I'm playing g6. Again, if you're new to the course, you're not going to know why I do g6 first, but basically, even though I know I'm going to play the King's Indian defense, I don't like to start with knight f6 because then I need to know how to handle bishop g5, the Trompowsky variation. And it's fine, no big deal. You could even do g6 and get into this. But just to avoid it, I like to do g6 first. And now if they do bishop g5, I do bishop g7. And then when I do knight f6, if they take me, I take with the bishop. I do not have to double up my pawns. You don't have to do it. This is just me. So the game, c4, knight f6, knight c3, bishop g7. And at this point, guys, I'm waiting to see what my opponent decides. He's going to play the classical, the same-ish, the fianchetto variation, the Averbach. And he decided to play bishop d3. This is a tricky move because it's not dangerous, but it's still not clear. It's not that clear what they're going to do. They could even do f4 at some point and get into a 4-pawn variation. So I decided to just castle, and then my opponent goes knight g to e2. Now, we had a lesson on this knight g to e2. Sometimes they just want to do knight g3, h4, and h5. So still, this move order, one more time, is a little bit tricky, so I need to be careful. But one thing that I noticed is that since this knight is not on f3, I ask myself, this is not something that I get often, but what is the main difference between knight f3 and knight e2? And guys, the difference is that this knight is not controlling e5. So here, instead of just going e5, which is perfectly fine, I decided to do knight c6. And basically, now I'm not so concerned if they do d5. Now, this we've learned is just bad for the white pieces. It creates weaknesses on the dark squares. And now if I go knight e5, this knight is not here to take me and double up the pawns. Not that it's a big deal, but it's nice to know that that's a possibility. So I did knight c6. My opponent did not do d5. Very well done. Instead, he played f3. Guys, the moment I see this, this is looking more like a same-ish. And if you're not that experienced with the King's Indian defense, you might get confused because if you remember when we talked about the same-ish, I gave you two different variations to play against it, but none of them included castling so early. So if you get confused with the move order, you could get into this position and now you're playing the same-ish. The good thing is that with the bishop on d3, it's not that big a deal. It's different if they put the bishop on e3 first. So I decided after f3 to just use one of the ideas that we learned on lesson, I want to say probably 86, 88, when we talked about the same-ish. I gave you guys what I called my secret weapon. And that secret weapon was to do knight d7. So I did knight d7. I'm putting more pressure. Let me actually put this here. I'm putting more pressure on d4. And now I also could play e5. And don't forget, guys, from that idea, after e5, we could even do some queen h4s. So e5 is ready. The engine is marking knight h5 as the best move. I did not like it here, so I just went with the ideas that we already know. So knight d7, hitting d4, bishop e3, and my opponent continues to play very logically. Natural move, developing and continuing to support that strong center. So guys, now it is the time. If you play the King's Indian defense, the Pierce, any of these hyper-modern openings, you cannot forget. I'm going to allow them to control the center. I'm going to put pressure on it with pieces, but sooner or later, I need to strike the center with the pawn. e5, c5, these are the main ideas. So finally, I decided to do e5. My opponent goes d5. And the moment that we get this center, all of you following this course should know what to do, guys. Center is locked. I need to pay attention to my pawn structure to see where I need to attack. So my middle game plan based on this pawn structure is to expand on the king side, and I need to target the pawn in front of my most forward pawn. So this is my most forward pawn. I need to do f5 to target it and expand on the king side. So after d5, all of you should be, the first thing that should come to mind is knight e7. However, in this position, I did not play mechanically, and I played knight d7, bringing the knight to the center. And of course, I had to calculate, because this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking knight d4, if they take with the knight, well, that's going to be a very nice fork. I get the knight back, fork. But if they take with the bishop, pawn takes knight b5, notice, guys, that d4 is going to be hanging. And if I did something like queen f6, well, they take on c7. If I did c5, they're going to do en passant. So I needed to be okay with this variation. Now, this is the strategic principle that I told you my opponent did not really pay attention to. So I was okay with this variation because after knight b5, I calculated to do a6, get the pawn. But now after queen g5, I'm just putting pressure on the dark squares. If they just castle to defend, well, dark square, check, and I'm going to get the knight. But even if I didn't have that quick tactic, the fact that the weak squares are going to be, the dark squares are going to be weak is enough compensation for that pawn. And guys, I gotta tell you, at the beginning when I learned about these concepts, even if I got this opportunity, I was not going to do it. Like, I remember reviewing many Karpov games, which had a lesson on the Karpovian style. And even in these situations, I'll be like, you know what? Karpov is Karpov. I probably never get my pawn back. I'm not gonna get into it. But at some point, we need to trust these principles and give it a try. And the more you do it, the more confident you get, and then you're going to be playing at a different level. So anyhow, my opponent did not take. So instead, after knight d4, they castled, keeping it simple. They won no trouble. And now, look, at this point, one more time, it's middle game. I need to pay attention to my candidate move. So I'm considering knight takes first, and then f5. I'm considering f5 first. But then the other move that I thought of was pawn to c5. And I know that pawn to c5 is going to give me a new kind of center. Still locked, but when the pawn goes to c5, there are new things to keep in mind. Of course, I need to consider en passant, and I was ready to do pawn takes pawn, getting the semi-open file, controlling d5 so that the knight never comes over. So I was okay with this. But typically what happens is, with this kind of center, I know that the white pieces typically try to make contact, open up the b file. I need to be okay with it. Now, so that you know, for the black pieces, guys, we need to expand on the king side. This is typically the plan. Sometimes you also fight for the b file, but for the most part, we're going to expand on the king side. So c5 was played, queen d2. Look, my opponent is not even getting into any of that. So queen d2, I finally go f5, and this is consistent with our plan, targeting the pawn in front of our most forward pawn. So after f5, we got bishop d4, and guys, this is where my opponent lost the game. Again, I'm playing a 1798, almost 1800 player. They should know this. If all of your pawns are fixed on light squares, then the light square bishop is going to be really, really bad. There's no mobility. This one is a good one, so I want to preserve it for as long as I can. Now, this knight is very powerful, I know, but still, they shouldn't have given me that bishop. So bishop takes knight, and now I need to decide, am I going to take with the c pawn or with the e pawn? Guys, this should be a no-brainer, so take your time if you have not made that decision yet. Here, of course, I'm going to take with the e pawn. It comes with a tempo, so they don't have time to take me here. And then after knight b5, I went knight e5. Guys, nice timing, because now not only am I bringing the knight to a very nice square, I'm also opening up the bishop to capture on f5. Now, let me go back here for a moment. Taking with the c pawn was not that attractive, because let's say they move the knight to b5 or to d1, it doesn't matter. It was clear that it was going to be easy for them to make contact on c5 and expand on the queen side. So instead, I want to keep the queen side under control, so that way my opponent has nothing. And then I make room for my pieces. So knight e5, very nice. And again, it comes to a good square by opening up the bishop. So pawn takes pawn. And now, again, candidate moves, guys. I considered bishop takes a5. I considered knight takes bishop first, followed by bishop f5, and I even considered pawn to a6 first. I don't like this knight here, no rush, but I was looking forward to removing that knight from b5. It's just a little bit annoying, right? So here, this is what I calculated. Number one, bishop f5, bishop takes, rook takes, knight g3. I had to move the bishop, the rook again. It was not that attractive, but I had to consider it. Now the other one is knight takes, queen takes, bishop f5, and when the queen moves, I'm going to have, guys, my pair of bishops very well placed, plus a protected passed pawn. So this variation, I liked it way better. Now a6, it was interesting, but among many other things, I was concerned with pawn takes, giving me the knight, but then they take again. I didn't think it was necessary. So knight takes e3, queen takes, bishop f5 with the tempo, queen goes to b3. Interesting, putting pressure on b7 indirectly, but that's okay. Now, guys, at this moment, this is move number 15. I need you to pause the video and see if you can come up with the winning continuation. And this is something that we had a lesson on very recently. You should be more than familiar with this. And even though my opponent did not play so well, I'm happy to get this game, because that way we get to reinforce everything that we've been talking about lately. Guys, the plan is simple. I wanted to bring a piece to e3. It could be a knight, bishop, rook, but I wanted to bring this rook that is doing nothing. So I calculated something like queen h4, and then if they take on d6, well, bishop e5, hitting the knight, hitting h2, I was okay with that. And by moving the queen, I was ready to bring this rook to e3. However, after queen h4, not only is it a little bit slow, but if something like knight g3, they will be hitting my bishop, my pawn, and I was not happy with it. So instead I said, you know what, ideally it would be this rook, but it is going to have to be this rook from f8. And guys, this is what I calculated. Look, and please try to, we're going to do it on the board, of course, but try to do it in your head first. So basically, I'm thinking rook e8, I'm hitting the knight. They have to either defend it or move it away. So rook e8, if they move it away, I get to e3 with a tempo. And again, dark squares, guys. The moment my opponent gave me their dark square bishop, I start to capitalize on them. So rook e8, knight g3, knight g3, rook e3, queen has to move. I had to consider both. So just for a moment, let me consider queen a4. This is one of the variations. After, I have bishop d3, using my active bishop, doing a fork. If the rook goes, let's say, to e1, for example, I have a6 hitting the knight goes back, then pawn to b5 hitting the queen, and when pawn takes, I'm going to take with the pawn, double attack on the queen, bishop is defending, and guys, I know that I could get a little bit blurry, but if you visualize that, you should really like that position. I have pawn on b5, pawn on c5, bishop on d3. That knight is ugly on a3. My rook is powerful on e3. This has to be completely winning for black. And of course, after rook e8, rook e1, I have the same thing. Bishop d3, hitting the knight, hitting the pawn. When the knight moves, we get into the same line. And of course, rook e8, rook e1, I forgot I have to do rook e3 first. Queen leaves, bishop d3, we get into the same line. So basically, I did the move. My opponent moved to g3. I get to e3 quickly with a tempo. Queen d1 instead of a4, fine. But still, I'm going to do bishop d3. Now, the other line was this. Bishop d3, rook e1, a6, knight goes back, b5, hitting the queen. Everything, guys, with tempo on their pieces. So forget about taking this rook. Like, for example, here when I did a6, if instead of moving, I need to ask myself, could they do anything else? Any surprises? Well, what if they take the rook? I'm going to take the knight with a tempo on the queen. Then I get the rook back. Okay, so that was under control. So if knight goes back, b5. Again, no time to get the rook. I'm hitting the queen. And then this is defended, and we're attacking twice that queen. So something like this, guys. This is a protected pass pawn. This is just too much. If I show you the engine, it's giving 549. So this is what I calculated. My opponent did not go for it completely. Instead, let me go back. Instead, after knight g3, rook e3, queen d1, and then, guys, after bishop d3, hitting the rook, hitting the pawn, my opponent decided to give me the exchange. So rook c1, and the engine is marking it as a good move. It does make sense. And now, look, there's obviously a good move to get the rook, but don't forget, whenever we find a good move, we need to look for a better one. And the move that I wanted to do here, guys, was pawn to a6. Simple, removing the knight. And then here, instead of my opponent going back, he decided to, hey, why is that marked as a good move? Well, I guess my opponent is in trouble already. But anyways, guys, by now, I could tell my opponent was getting frustrated just by looking at his face. And after getting the knight, this is just too easy. So rook e1, here, see if you can come up with the best move to convert this into a win. I decided to, instead of just simplifying, which is perfectly fine, I decided to just do bishop a6. Now, if they take, well, I take back with the fork. I'm going to get the rook. If they don't, let's say they simply move out of the way. Well, I'm going to take with a discovery on the rook. So instead, my opponent, after bishop a6, took on e3, bishop takes, king moves, give me the rook, and guys, this is completely winning now. With that said, let me show you why I said that my high accuracy was actually an accident here. I know that I'm already winning, so this is what I did. I went rook e8, activating the rook. We got knight e4, queen f4, and now look at this. My opponent plays pawn to g3. Now here, guys, look, I could do anything. I'm winning by a rook. So I said, you know what, queen f5 should be good enough to get out of trouble. But then I calculated, what if I do queen e3? Simplification, if I remove the queens, that's it. No counterplay whatsoever. So I calculated queen e3, queen takes, pawn takes, knight f6 check, king f7, knight takes rook, king takes rook, king comes over, and then I'm thinking, okay, this is a pass pawn, I got the bishop, this is an easy win, right? However, after the game, I'm talking to my opponent, and he tells me, no, but after the fork, I didn't do it because if king f7 and I take the knight, you simply push the pawn and you promote. And guys, I did not even consider it. I should have, but I didn't. So if my opponent had done that, probably my accuracy would have been lower. But anyhow, here he played this, they traded, of course, and then my opponent played king g2. Again, if this move, then all I needed to do was advance and I promote. But in my calculation, probably I just realized this was already winning and I didn't even bother to look into something else. But that's no excuse. I should have thought of it automatically. But anyhow, after king g2, I simply went bishop b2, then bishop d4. This is going to be here forever. This is just winning. And then after b5, my opponent simply resigned. I think this is just how it could continue. Yeah. So there you have it, guys. A very simple game. Again, my opponent did not play that good, but you can see how keeping it simple, using the ideas that we already know about this opening, using everything that we've learned in our middle game strategy lessons, we're able to defeat an 1800 player. So with that said, guys, let me know in the comments if you found this useful and if you want to see my other rounds. And with that said, I'll see you in our next lesson.